Aging farmer donates last savings to orphanage. Shocked to learn it's named after his lost son. The headline had appeared in the local newspaper 6 months ago, but Arthur Whitley still kept the clipping folded in his wallet, the creases so deep now that the words were beginning to fade. Not that it mattered. He knew them by heart. The late October wind whipped across the barren fields, bending the few remaining stalks of corn that Arthur hadn't yet harvested. At 78, everything took longer than it used to. His arthritic fingers curled around his walking stick as he made his way down the long dirt driveway, past the weathered mailbox that still bore both his and Margaret's names, though she'd been gone 5 years now. The cold bit through his worn canvas jacket, but he barely noticed anymore. Cold had become his constant companion, both outside and within. The farm hadn't turned a real profit in nearly a decade. 300 acres that had once provided for a family of 4, now barely sustained one old man. Last year's drought had been the final blow to whatever hope remained of keeping the land that had been in his family for 4 generations. The bank had been patient, more patient than most would be these days, but even their generosity had limits. Foreclosure notices had started arriving in early summer, each one more final than the last. Arthur paused at the edge of his property, where the dirt road met the county highway. From here, he could see most of what had once been his life's work. The faded red barn with its sagging roof, the small white farmhouse with peeling paint, the equipment shed where his father had taught him to repair tractors, and the apple orchard where Michael had taken his first steps. Michael. Even after 30 years, the name brought a physical ache to Arthur's chest. His son's face remained frozen in time, eternally 22, with Margaret's gentle eyes and Arthur's stubborn chin. The car accident had happened so quickly. A rainy night, a slick road, a driver who'd had too much to drink. That single moment had cleaved Arthur's life into 2 distinct parts, before and after. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Arthur lowered himself carefully into the chair at the kitchen table, the same chair he'd sat in for nearly 50 years. The table was bare except for a stack of papers, bank statements, the foreclosure notice, and on top, a check. His last savings pulled from the account he and Margaret had been building since their wedding day. $42,817. Not enough to save the farm, but enough to make a difference somewhere. He ran his weathered fingertip over the amount. Margaret would have approved, he thought. She had always been the generous one, the one who believed in second chances and silver linings. After Michael's death, while Arthur had retreated into his grief, she had somehow found the strength to help others. Our hearts expand when we give, she used to say. He hadn't understood then. Perhaps he was beginning to now. The decision hadn't come easily. For weeks he'd sat at the same table, watching the sunrise through the kitchen window, contemplating what to do with the money. It wasn't enough to start over somewhere new at his age. It wasn't enough to matter much to the distant nieces and nephews who were his only remaining family. But it was enough to honor the 2 people he had loved most in this world. The children's home in Madison had been Margaret's favorite charity. She'd volunteered there for years after Michael died, reading stories to the children, helping with homework, baking cookies for special occasions. These children need love more than anything, she would tell him, just like our Michael did. Arthur had never been able to bring himself to visit. The sight of children without parents was too painful a reminder of the parent without a child. But now, with everything ending, it seemed the right place for a new beginning. The drive to Madison took nearly 2 hours. Arthur's old pickup truck protested the journey with various rattles and groans, not unlike those that escaped his own body when he rose each morning. The city had changed since he'd last visited. More buildings, more traffic, more noise. But he found the children's home easily enough, his memory clearer about this particular route than he'd expected. Sunflower Children's Home looked different than he remembered from Margaret's descriptions. The old Victorian house had been expanded, with a new wing added to the east side. A colorful playground occupied what had once been an empty side yard. A sign near the entrance announced plans for a library addition, with a fundraising thermometer showing they were still far from their goal. Arthur sat in his truck for nearly 20 minutes, check in hand, gathering his courage. This place had meant so much to Margaret. He wanted to do this right, for her sake if not his own. Finally, he tucked the check into an envelope, on which he'd written simply, "For the children." In memory of Margaret and Michael Whitley. The young woman at the reception desk had kind eyes and a patient smile. She listened as Arthur, in halting sentences, explained his purpose. His fingers trembled slightly as he handed over the envelope. This is very generous, Mr. Whitley. she said after peeking inside. Would you like to speak with our director? She'd want to thank you personally. Arthur shook his head. Not necessary. Just use it well. He turned to leave, his mission accomplished, already thinking of the long drive home and the empty house waiting for him. Wait, the young woman called after him. Your name is Whitley? Arthur Whitley? He paused, one hand on the door. Yes, please, Mr. Whitley. I think the director really would want to meet you. Could you wait just a moment? Confused but too polite to refuse, Arthur lowered himself into a chair in the small waiting area. The walls were covered with children's artwork, bright, hopeful splashes of color that made his eyes ache with their intensity. So different from the muted tones of his own life. 5 minutes stretched into 10, and Arthur was considering leaving anyway when a door opened and a middle-aged woman emerged. She had dark hair streaked with gray and wore a simple blue dress. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though Arthur couldn't place her. Mr. Whitley, she said, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Rebecca Collins, the director here at Sunflower. Thank you so much for coming. Would you join me in my office? There's something I'd like to show you. Mystified but compliant, Arthur followed her down a hallway lined with photographs, groups of children and staff members, spanning what looked like decades. Dr. Collins's office was small but warm, with a window overlooking the playground where children bundled against the autumn chill were playing. Please sit down, she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. As Arthur settled himself, she moved to a shelf and removed a leather-bound book. Mr. Whitley, how much did your wife tell you about her volunteer work here? Arthur frowned slightly. Enough. She came twice a week for 15 years, I believe. Read to the children. Helped with homework. Baked for birthdays. Doctor? Collins nodded, a gentle smile on her face. She did much more than that, Mr. Whitley. Margaret was the heart of this place for many years. She opened the book, which Arthur now saw was a photo album. This wing of our building, the new addition you might have noticed, it was completed 5 years ago. She turned the album toward him, showing a photograph of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. There in the center of the group was Margaret, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, her smile as bright as Arthur remembered. We called it the Michael Whitley Memorial Wing. Dr. Collins said softly. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. What? Your wife donated the seed money. She made us promise not to tell you. She said, Doctor. Collins paused as if searching for the exact words. She said that grief takes different shapes for different hearts, and that yours needed to heal in its own time. Arthur's hands trembled as he took the album, staring at the photograph of his wife, standing proudly before a building named for their son. A building he hadn't known existed. The weight of all he had missed pressed down on his chest. I don't understand, he managed. We didn't have that kind of money. Doctor. Collins' expression was gentle. She saved for years, Mr. Whitley. A little from her gardening money, she said. A little from an inheritance from her sister. She was very determined. The tears came then, silent at first, then with deep, shuddering breaths that seemed to break something loose inside Arthur's chest. All these years, while he had closed himself off from the world, Margaret had been building this legacy for their son, creating something lasting and good from their deepest loss. Would you like to see it? Doctor. Collins asked when Arthur had composed himself. The Michael Wing? The children would be at lunch now. We could have a quiet tour. Arthur nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The Michael Whitley Memorial Wing housed 20 children, from ages 7 to 16. The hallways were bright and clean, with artwork and achievement certificates proudly displayed outside each door. A common room held bookshelves, comfortable seating, and several computers. Everything about the space spoke of care and attention to detail. Most of these children have experienced significant trauma. Doctor is Collins explained as they walked. The Michael Wing specializes in helping kids who need extra emotional support. Your wife always had a special connection with our most troubled children. At the end of the hallway, a plaque caught Arthur's eye. He stepped closer to read it. In loving memory of Michael Whitley, 1970 to 1992, every child deserves to be seen, heard, and loved for exactly who they are. Margaret Whitley. Beneath this was a photograph of a young man, his son, smiling broadly, his whole life ahead of him. Arthur reached out, his fingertips brushing the image. She never told me, he whispered. She wanted to. Doctor, you're my Sherry, Collins said quietly. Many times. but she was afraid it would be too painful for you. Arthur stood there, hands still touching the plaque, as the full weight of his isolation descended upon him. While he had wrapped himself in grief, refusing to move forward, Margaret had transformed her pain into purpose. She had kept Michael's memory alive, not through endless mourning, but through acts of love and service. And Arthur had missed it all. Your donation today, Dr. Donessa Shurishurn, Colin said, breaking the silence. It's enough to complete our library project. We've been trying to raise the funds for nearly 2 years. Arthur turned to her, suddenly recognizing where he had seen her before. You were one of them, one of the children. She smiled, surprised. Yes, I was here when your wife first started volunteering. I was 11, angry at the world, convinced no one would ever care about me again. Margaret was. She saw something in me no one else did. She's the reason I went to college, the reason I came back here to work. She gestured around them. In a way, she's the reason this place is what it is today. The realization settled over Arthur like a warm blanket. His Margaret, always quietly changing the world without fanfare or recognition. How many lives had she touched while he had remained isolated on their farm, trapped in his own grief? I'd like to see more, Arthur said suddenly. Not just the building, the children, the programs, everything. Dr. Collins's face brightened. Of course, we'd be honored. And actually, if you're willing, the older children in the Michael Wing have a tradition of sharing lunch with special visitors. They'd love to meet you. The cafeteria was noisy in the way that only a room full of children can be. A cacophony of voices, laughter, and the clatter of utensils. Arthur felt momentarily overwhelmed as all eyes turned to him when he entered with Dr. Collins. But then a teenage girl with braided hair stood up and pulled out a chair at their table. You're Mrs. Whitley's husband, she said. It wasn't a question. She had your picture on her keychain. She showed us sometimes. Arthur nodded, lowering himself carefully into the offered seat. 5 teenagers sat around the table, watching him with curious eyes. I'm Zoe. The girl with braids continued. This is Marcus, Dion, Lily, and Thomas. She pointed to each of her companions in turn. We're the senior residents of the Michael Wing. Mrs. Whitley talked about you a lot, Marcus said, a lanky boy with glasses. She said you grew the best corn in Wisconsin. A small surprised laugh escaped Arthur's lips. Did she now? And that you could fix anything, added Lily, a quiet girl with searching eyes. She brought in a music box once that you had repaired for her. It played Claire de Lune. The memory surfaced suddenly. Margaret's birthday gift from her mother, broken when she dropped it while dusting. Arthur had spent 3 evenings carefully reassembling the mechanism. She kept that old thing? He asked, his voice thick. She said it reminded her that broken things could be beautiful again, Lily said simply. The conversation flowed more easily after that. The children asked questions about the farm, about Arthur's life, about Michael. They seemed to know so much already. Stories Margaret had shared over the years, pieces of his life that had continued without him even knowing. As lunch ended, Zoe hesitated, then asked, Would you like to see our memory wall? Mrs. Whitley helped us start it. The memory wall occupied one side of the common room in the Michael Wing. It was covered with photographs, drawings, letters, and small mementos, a colorful collage of remembrance. It's for honoring the people we've lost or had to leave behind, Zoe explained. Mrs. Whitley said it's important to keep their memories with us, but in a way that helps us move forward, not stay stuck. In the center of the wall was a photograph of Margaret, surrounded by children, her smile radiant. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, our Mrs. Whitley, who taught us that love never disappears, it just changes shape. Arthur stood before the wall, a tightness in his chest that wasn't entirely painful. For 30 years, he had kept his grief pristine, unchanged, as if altering it would somehow dishonor Michael's memory. But Margaret had understood something he hadn't, that love and loss could become something new, something that nurtured rather than diminished. Your wife came every Tuesday and Thursday, right up until the week before she passed. Dr. Pirm, Collins said quietly. The children gave her a reason to keep going after her cancer diagnosis. And she gave them hope that even in the darkest times, they weren't alone. The word hit Arthur like a physical blow. Alone. That's what he had been, what he had chosen to be. While Margaret had built this community, this family of wounded hearts healing together, he had remained isolated in his grief, letting it consume him until nothing else remained. Later that afternoon, as the early winter darkness began to fall, Arthur sat in Dr. Collins's office once more. The check lay on the desk between them, but now it seemed inadequate, a pale gesture compared to what Margaret had accomplished. "I'd like to do more," Arthur said, his voice firmer than it had been all day. "Not just money. Time, whatever I can offer." "Doctor," Collins smiled. "We always need volunteers, Mr. Whitley, especially male role models. Many of our children have never had a positive relationship with an older man." "I'm not sure what I could teach anyone," Arthur admitted. "I'm just an old farmer." "A farmer who knows about growing things?" she pointed out. "We've been wanting to start a vegetable garden. The children could learn about where food comes from, the value of patience and care. Would something like that interest you?" For the first time in years, Arthur felt a spark of genuine enthusiasm. "I could do that. Yes, I could definitely do that. And perhaps, Doctor," Collins added carefully, "you might consider sharing some stories about Michael sometimes. The children in his wing feel a connection to him, even though they never met him. They'd love to know more about the person their home is named for." Arthur's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I could try. It's been difficult to speak of him. Of course, there's no rush. Just know that his memory has been a blessing to many children here." Your wife made sure of that. As Arthur drove home that evening, the empty farmhouse waiting for him seemed different somehow. Not just a repository of memories, but a place of possibility. The foreclosure was still coming. That reality hadn't changed. But for the first time, Arthur could imagine a life beyond these acres. A life that included children's laughter, purpose, and connection. The next morning, Arthur rose before dawn, as he had every day for 60 years. But instead of moving mechanically through his chores, he found himself standing at the window, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered fields in shades of pink and gold. He thought of Margaret, of Michael, of the children he had met yesterday with their resilient hearts and curious eyes. He thought of Zoe asking if he would come back to help with their science project on plant growth, of Marcus wondering if Arthur might teach him to drive a tractor someday, of Lily, who had slipped him a drawing just before he left, a careful pencil sketch of the farm, based entirely on descriptions Margaret had shared years ago. Arthur made coffee and carried it to the kitchen table, where he spread out a notepad and began to make lists. Things to keep, things to sell, things to give away. The process that had seemed impossible for months now felt like a door opening rather than closing. When the phone rang, he was surprised to hear Dr. Collins's voice. "Mr. Whitley, I hope I'm not calling too early, but I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I wanted to propose something." Arthur listened as she explained. The Sunflower Children's Home owned a small caretaker's cottage on their property, currently unoccupied. It needed some repairs. Nothing major, but enough that they hadn't had the resources to fix it up for their groundskeeper, who currently lived off-site. "We could use someone with your skills, Mr. Neversary Whitley. Someone who knows about maintenance, gardening, who could keep an eye on things, especially at night. The cottage is small, but it has a good-sized yard for a garden. And it would be rent-free, of course, in exchange for your help around the property." Arthur's hand tightened around the phone. "You're offering me a job? And a place to live?" "I'm offering you a chance to be part of what Margaret built," Dr. Collins said gently. "The children need you, and I think perhaps you need them too." The words hung in the air between them, a truth Arthur wasn't quite ready to acknowledge fully. "I'll need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." But even as he said the words, Arthur knew what his answer would be. The farm was already lost to him. The only question was what came next. And for the first time in decades, he felt a pull towards something, rather than just the dull push of necessity. Over the next month, Arthur visited the Sunflower home several more times. He brought tools and repaired a leaky faucet in the kitchen. He surveyed the land behind the property and drew up plans for a vegetable garden that the children could help maintain. He sat with the teenagers in the Michael wing, and haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, told them stories about his son, Michael's determination to rescue injured animals, his talent for making up bedtime stories for his younger sister, his dream of becoming a teacher. 2 days before Christmas, Arthur signed the foreclosure papers on the farm. The bank had found a buyer, a young couple with dreams of organic farming and farm-to-table dining. They had asked if Arthur would be willing to spend some time showing them the particular challenges and opportunities of the land. He had agreed, feeling an unexpected satisfaction in the knowledge that the farm would continue, even if under different stewardship. That same afternoon, Arthur moved into the caretaker's cottage at Sunflower Children's Home. The space was indeed small, just a bedroom, bathroom, living area, and kitchenette. But after the emptiness of the farmhouse, it felt cozy rather than cramped. The children had prepared for his arrival, decorating the cottage with welcome signs and a small Christmas tree. Dr. Kinchern Collins, Rebecca, as she now insisted he call her, had helped arrange for most of his furniture to be sold with the farm, but he had kept a few precious items. Margaret's rocking chair, the kitchen table where they had shared thousands of meals, the bookshelf Michael had built in high school woodshop. These pieces now found new places in the cottage, connecting his past to this unexpected future. On Christmas Eve, the staff and children gathered in the common room for their annual celebration. Arthur sat somewhat awkwardly among them, still not entirely comfortable with the noise and activity of so many people. But when Zoe appeared at his side with a cup of hot chocolate and a shy smile, he felt something in his chest loosen just a bit. "We have a tradition," she explained. "Everyone shares one wish or hope for the coming year. Not a present wish, but a heart wish." Arthur nodded, watching as the children took turns speaking. Their wishes were both ordinary and profound. To do better in school, to find a forever family, to learn to trust again, to make a friend who understood. When his turn came, Arthur cleared his throat, surprised to find himself nervous. "I wish," he began slowly, "to learn how to be part of a family again. This family, if you'll have me." The room grew quiet. Then Lily, the quiet girl who rarely spoke above a whisper, stood up and crossed to where a cabinet stood against the wall. She removed something and brought it to Arthur. It was a framed photograph of Margaret standing in the garden behind the home, surrounded by children. She was laughing, her head thrown back, looking more carefree than Arthur had seen her in years. "Mrs. Whitley told us once that her greatest wish was that someday you would find your way here," Lily said, her voice soft but clear. "She said that when you were ready, we should give you this." Arthur took the frame with trembling hands. On the back in Margaret's neat handwriting was a note. "My dearest Arthur, if you're reading this, it means you've finally found your way to the place that has been my second home for so many years. I've wished so often that you could share this joy with me, but I understood that your grief had to follow its own path. These children have taught me that family isn't just what we're born into, but what we create together through love and commitment. They have been my healing, just as I hope they might someday be yours. Remember what we always told Michael? Your heart is like a garden. What grows there depends on what you plant and tend. I've tried to plant hope here, Arthur. Perhaps you might help it grow. All my love, always, Margaret." Arthur pressed the frame to his chest, tears flowing freely now. Around him, the children and staff of Sunflower Home, of Michael's home, waited quietly, allowing him this moment of connection across time and loss. Finally, he looked up, meeting the eyes of those gathered around him. "My wife was a wise woman," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Much wiser than me. She knew that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community, in purpose, in service." He gestured around the room. "This is what she built from our loss. And I'm honored, so honored, to be part of continuing it." Later that night, as snow fell gently outside his new home, Arthur sat in Margaret's rocking chair, the photograph in his lap. For the first time in 30 years, when he thought of Michael, the crushing weight of loss was balanced by something else. Pride in the legacy that bore his name, gratitude for the life that had been, however brief. And when he thought of the future, of spring gardens to plant, of children learning to coax life from soil, of stories yet to be shared, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. The newspaper clipping was still in his wallet, the words fading, but the truth of them only growing stronger. "Aging farmer donates last savings to orphanage. Shocked to learn it's named after his lost son." What the headline couldn't capture was how that moment had been not an ending, but a beginning. A door opening to a future Arthur Whitley had never imagined, but which had been waiting for him all along. Outside, the first star of Christmas Eve appeared in the darkening sky. Arthur whispered a thank you. To Margaret, to Michael, to whatever grace had finally led him here, to this unexpected family, this second chance, this healing heart.